that this is a kind of untapped reservoir of potential that a lot of organizations miss out.
I hate the most is we tried that before and it didn't work because it's super unhelpful. It's almost
organizations as well. There's a tension because a purpose-led organization actually should have a finite existence.
Welcome to The Business Of, brought to you by the Australian Graduate School of Management. In this episode, we explore what it means to lead with purpose in an accelerated world. Joining me is Will Phelps, Associate Professor at UNSW Business School. Will shares key findings from his research into how businesses can lead with purpose. I also speak to Annie Parker, Global Diversity and Inclusion Lead at Microsoft for Startups. Annie shares how defining her personal sense of purpose has made her the leader she is today. And finally, we hear from Pete Horsley, founder of Remarkable, and Alan Jones, Remarkable's entrepreneur in residence, about creating the mission of Australia's first disability tech accelerator. First, let's hear from Will Phelps. Will, welcome to The Business Of.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about purpose-led leadership, something that lots of people talk about, loosely and aggressively talk about. But from an academic's perspective, what is purpose-led leadership?
So interestingly, most of the thinking on purpose-led leadership has come from the area of consulting. It's a very popular term among consultants, and there's a number of great Harvard Business Review articles about it. And it's actually become very popular in some churches. In academia, we haven't so much used that terminology as we've used different terminology, really because, at least the way I understand purpose-led leadership, it really has two different components. And the consultants sort of smush these two components together. And as academics, we, being very pedantic, like to separate out everything into these very different categories. Part of it is having a singular purpose that guides you. And it's about having one goal or principle that directs everything else that you do. And it's related to having a focused sort of strategic intent. There's another element of purpose-led leadership, which is about how do you have individuals who believe that what they're doing matters, it has purpose, that it does something good for the world, and that it in some ways drawing on their best self.
And you've been researching the impact and the consequences of purpose-driven leadership. What have you uncovered?
So myself, along with a number of other scholars, have tried to understand, in particular, sort of the meaning component of to what extent is it valuable to have people believe that what they're doing matters for some higher purpose. And what the research generally shows is that it's a powerful motivator. The underlying thing that it's contrasted against is, for example, the assumption that people are just selfishly motivated by carrots and sticks. And this is based on the purpose of leadership sort of movement and idea, is based on the idea that people care about more than that they want to, in Adam Smith's words, not only be loved, but to be lovely, to be worthy of praise. And that if you can show them a way that their actions connect to some higher purpose, they'll do extraordinary things. And that this is a kind of untapped reservoir of potential that a lot of organizations miss out on because they may have more skeptical assumptions about what drives people.
So a leader, is it something that's inherent in them from day one, or is it something that they can think about and learn to articulate?
So I think it's a mindset that you can change, and you can be kind of like pessimist or optimist. You can see the glass half full or empty. You can see the ways in which people have a noble purpose or not. And if you buy into the mindset that people want to and will go above and beyond if they believe something that they're doing matters, then as a leader, it then becomes your job to make it clear, how do you do that? And a lot of times that involves not necessarily telling people, but helping to draw the link that they already implicitly know, making a connection concrete and vivid that is oftentimes implicit, that what you're doing has some benefit for someone. Because most of the jobs that exist and most of the organizations that exist are doing something valuable. And it's just about making that clearer to people. And that's, I think, a big part of leadership. It's in academic terms, we sometimes talk about transformational leadership or idealized influence. It's about being inspirational. And the research suggests that this is, across cultures, one of the best predictors of the extent to which people are seen as successful leaders and the extent to which their followers perform well, is whether or not they call on this idealized influence.
Which is good, I think, for anyone who's listening to this to recognize, right? So purpose-led leadership, does it come from the top or could it come from anywhere in an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there, I think, is where it sometimes becomes helpful going back to that distinction between the two different elements of purpose-led leadership. One being the overarching idea that unifies everything within the organization. I think that usually is set at the top. When it comes, though, to finding meaning in your work, that's something that we can do for ourselves, that we can do for each other, and that leaders oftentimes have a responsibility to do for the people who work for them. So depending on which aspect of purpose-led leadership you're talking about really determines the answer. You can sometimes talk about sort of having a mission statement or a purpose statement for yourself. What's your unique knowledge and abilities and passion that is going to allow you to contribute something of real value to the organization and to the world? And so for a lot of people, that's part of the process. It's not only sharing that with others and being a leader, but also even for themselves, why am I doing this? I mean, that's what the purpose-led leadership kind of movement's all about, is asking the why question, not how are we going to do things or what are we going to do, but what's the underlying bottom line purpose that can drive everything else.
I mean, I don't know if it's a true story, but there's the question asked of the janitor at NASA what his role was, and his job was, to put a man on the moon.
Yeah, I love that story. I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, but I love it. I always tell it as if it's true in my classes because it's so great.
Is a purpose-led organization only for certain types of organizations, or can you find purpose in all organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. So fair enough that there are probably some jobs and some organizations where it's easier to connect to some higher, more noble purpose. But my sense in working with organizations is that the link to some meaningful outcome and some noble purpose is oftentimes easier. It's untapped, that oftentimes there is a noble purpose there that people aren't seeing, or at least they're only seeing it in the abstract. There's a great study by Adam Grant. He did a study where there were a number of people raising money at a call center. I think it was for a charity. And what he did in this experiment is to inject some meaning into these people's lives. He connected the people at the call center who were raising money with the people who were the beneficiaries of the charity. I want to say it was something like people who got surgeries that in developing countries that help with their cleft palate or something. Connected them over to the people, the beneficiaries. And it said it was hugely transformational for these people, where what their work went from being sort of trying to get points in a call center to helping these people in a third world country. And so that was a case where there was a meaning there, but they just weren't seeing it because they weren't connected to the end user, to the customer. They weren't connected to the purpose. I love that study because it really shows meaning is a surprisingly important motivator for people that's oftentimes untapped.
What would you say to our listeners? How do they find their purpose? How do they communicate that purpose?
I think whether you're talking about your own personal purpose or the organization's purpose, it's oftentimes discovering and getting in contact with something that's usually already there. And it's asking the question, why are we? What are we about? And what about our purpose is central, distinctive, and enduring? What's unique about what we're doing that we can do over time, the long-term enduring, and what's really mattered, what's important? And then being sort of ruthless about saying anything that doesn't contribute to that purpose, we really need to stop doing. Because, that's a big part of the purpose-led movement, is not just doing new things or working harder, but stopping doing things that interfere with the purpose or don't contribute to it. There's a quote from Mark Twain where he says, "The two most important days of your life are the day when you're born and the day you find out why." Why was I born? What am I here for? And that's probably also true for an organization when it's a critical moment in the development of their culture, when they really crystallize for themselves, why are we?
Will, thank you so much for joining us today on The Business Of.
Oh, it was such a pleasure, Emma. Thank you.
This is The Business Of, a podcast looking at what it means to do well and do good in the world of business. It was great to hear Will define what purpose-led leadership really means and how we can use it to drive motivation and intrinsic desire to be at work every day, connecting what you do to what your organisation can deliver. Let's hear from Annie Parker, Global Diversity and Inclusion Lead at Microsoft for Startups. Annie, welcome to the Business of.
Thank you very much for having me, Emma. It's great to be here.
So very excited to be exploring purpose-led leadership with you. I feel like from the first minute I have read about you, met you, heard you speak, seen you work, it's been such an integral part of how you inspire others. What's led you to where you are today?
So I would describe my career so far as a series of extraordinary coincidences and luck. And when I say that out loud, a lot of people come back to me and say, oh, but you make your own luck. And there's some truth to that. But also you have to be open to it. You have to be able to see it for yourself. So my career started off very sensibly. I worked in management consulting. Please don't hold that against me. Now, there's a Steve Jobs commencement speech that he did at Stanford many years ago now, where he says something along the lines of, your life will only make sense looking backwards. You can very rarely ever see it plotting out in front of you, looking forwards. And he's absolutely right. And that really resonated for me when I started looking back at my career at a really important inflection point when, after that consulting role, I ended up at O2 in the UK, another telco. And I did a job there for about 5 or 6 years. And I went up through the ranks and got promoted to different marketing roles and leadership roles. And, I was doing really well. And I could see this pathway kind of stretching out in front of me of the next promotion and taking on more responsibility. And by this stage, I'd already got the equivalent of $1 billion P&L, 15 million customers, and just a lot of pressure came with it. And the part that was missing for me was I couldn't see what I was doing that would actually help the world in some way, shape, or form. Now, my marketing director at that time did actually say, don't forget, people use their mobile phones every day to connect, to make important calls. I'm like, it's a bit of a stretch though, isn't it, love? It's a bit of a stretch to feel the genuine purpose in what I'm doing every day. And then something important happened where I went on a training program led by an incredible company called the Oxford Leadership Academy. And what they did was to help us understand the sorts of leader that we wanted to be, and then how that might make sense for O2 and Telefonica. And it was a really interesting exercise. One of the first things they got us to do is take a blank sheet of paper, and on the horizontal axis, time, on the vertical axis, happiness, and to just plot out all of the major things that have happened in your life so far and kind of go, well, did they make you happy? Did they make you unhappy? Or did they make you go, meh? And I plotted out my career, and the entire 5 years prior to it just made me go, meh. I'm like, well, that's not good enough. And then I read out my timeline to a colleague who was on the course as well. And I said, what do you think? This guy called Pete Williams, by the way. Pete, hi, if you're listening. And Pete goes, I have absolutely no earthly idea why you work at this company. Because everything that you stand for and then everything that you're rewarded for is so completely different. You're rewarded for delivering results and revenue targets and customer satisfaction. But actually what you love doing is helping people. And I can see that in your timeline. Sometimes it takes somebody to just say it so bluntly to you that it smacks you around the face metaphorically. Now, it took me about 6 or 7 months later, I filled in the gap of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life by climbing Kilimanjaro with my dad, my brother, and 5 friends. And I remember we got to the top. We could just see the summit ahead of us, and I could see the sign saying, congratulations, you've reached the top. And I thought I would get hit with this wave of adrenaline that would sort of make me sprint to the end. And I didn't. The overwhelming feeling was one of sadness and emptiness, because the thing that had filled my purpose for the last 6 months, climbing the mountain and getting ready for it, I knew was going to be over. And I knew I had to still go back to the job I didn't love. And I did the one thing that I would always say to anybody now who doesn't feel that major kind of driving force and purpose in their job. I quit. I took my phone out, because there is cell phone coverage at the top of Kili, just in case you're wondering. And I quit. And I can't tell you the weight that lifted off my shoulders immediately. And then what happened after that was a series of other conversations of, because I declared to the world, if you like, that I was no longer on that career pathway, lots of people were going, well, what else are you going to do? I'm like, I don't know. So we were having conversations about perhaps joining the sales team or HR or other, and of course they weren't right either. But because I was being offered new opportunities, I got to say no to things. I got to decide. And prior to that, I didn't have that choice because it was just assumed that I would keep on the path I was on. So I guess the first piece of advice in there is, if you're not happy in what you're doing, you need to tell the world. You need to tell your colleagues in your company and your friends and your family, because if you don't explain it and say it explicitly, how will they know? And then the second part of that, I guess, is that you need to be in charge of your own destiny. So you need to choose those pathways for yourself. And the interesting point was, after about 6 or 7 months of trying to figure out what was going to come next, the right thing did come along. And I joined the Startup Accelerator program that Telefonica had just invested in. But again, that opportunity wouldn't have come if I hadn't declared I wanted something different. And then that changed everything for me. I moved from a role where it was very corporate and very sensible to the world of startups and innovation. And that was 10 years ago. And I look back at that moment on Kilimanjaro, and I know that it changed the rest of my path, but I had to choose it.
And did you know that startups was going to give you that sense of fulfillment?
Not really, no, because one of the things, and you'll know this as well, Emma, because I know you work a lot with early stage companies and founders around the world. It's addictive, by the way, once you start, because the addictive part comes from, you can see your help actually helping in front of your very eyes. It's not some 457-page PowerPoint deck that you send off somewhere and then you go, I wonder if anyone's ever going to read that. It's a genuine purpose-driven conversation of the help that you can give, even if it's just a small thing of, hey, I tried that, it didn't work, do it like this. So you're passing on your experience and you're passing on your mistakes so that others don't need to make them as well. Or it could be opening up the door of a connection, or just giving them a bit more confidence to keep going when it gets a little bit hard. For me, it's that whole thing of, you can see your help helping, and geez, that's so motivating to want to keep doing it.
Certainly for all the time that I've known you, but this diversity, inclusion, empowerment of women, but more about creating that opportunity, right? How has that kind of played in, and particularly like to your role today, right?
So it's a great question. And I think it's one of the things that, so I sit in one sense within technology as a woman in technology, which puts me in the, I'm a diverse person, but I'm not really, because I'm white. I come from a middle-class family. I had a very good upbringing and access to education and healthcare and lots of other things that put me way ahead of the pack when I compare myself to people of color, people with disability, people from other underrepresented backgrounds. And there's two ways that I like to describe this. The first is the really positive way, which is talent is equally distributed and opportunity is not. And I firmly believe that technology has an incredible, sort of opportunity to level that playing field. But then the other way that I look at it is, I have overwhelming privilege, and it's up to me to use that wisely. So, a good friend, a mutual friend of ours, often uses the analogy of, in the past, perhaps we've been told, if you've been given a help on the rung up a ladder, it's up to you to turn back and then, sort of put the ladder back down for somebody else. Well, one of our good friends, Kirsten Ferguson, would say, no, don't use a ladder, use a massive net, throw that net down, and bring as many people up with you as possible. And I love that analogy, because it shouldn't just be a one-on-one thing. It should be one to many. Technology can do that. Our communities can do that. Our networks can do that. And when you go and speak to perhaps women of color or people with a disability who have got incredible ideas for businesses, the fact that they don't get to have the conversations with investors or customers because they just don't have those networks, well, we have them. We can provide that connectivity. And if you think about the speed at which we can affect change as a result of doing that, I find that massively empowering and motivating, because we get to leave the world a little bit better than when we found it.
And you've done this through many initiatives like the hackathons and really looking after the vulnerable and those that aren't represented. And today you're now working at Microsoft in a very purpose-led organisation, with Satya Nadella in particular really driving a lot of change and growth and transformation with values and purpose at its heart. How have you ended back in a corporate, and how does that align?
You know, when I said at the beginning that life is, or my career path has been a sort of a series of extraordinary coincidences, my boss at Telstra, a lady called Charlotte Yarconi, incredible woman. She was leading all of the sort of software acquisitions and investments at Telstra at the time, and we ended up investing some money in building a startup accelerator because an awful lot of the companies that she was putting forward to invest in or acquire were all from the US. And the question was, well, where are all the Aussie founders? And she went, well, I hear more Aussie accents in Silicon Valley talking about innovation than I do here. So that was the reason and the purpose behind starting the startup program for Telstra. She moved back to the US probably 3.5 years ago now, and was looking to go into another interesting role. She ended up at Microsoft, and after about a year, she and I had a conversation, and she said, we're looking for somebody to join the team to look at how we sort of support startups and innovation. So I joined Microsoft 2.5 years ago, and I count myself incredibly lucky that a connection in my past has been so influential on what I've been able to do at Microsoft. And in the last 6 months, my role has sort of shifted from being less about the kind of the standard offerings and programs that we put out into market, and now to actually look at each of those offerings and say, do they and will they resonate for people from underrepresented backgrounds? And I'll give you an example, right? So we have an offer out there which is for Series A and B kind of scale or status startups. So these are companies that have already raised significant funding, they have revenue, they have customers. Now, just by that definition in and of itself, we are looking at an incredibly small audience of women, an incredibly smaller audience of other underrepresented groups, because the nature of the industry of startup right now is that only 2% of funding goes to women-led companies. So by definition, if we're looking at companies that have already been funded, it's going to be overwhelmingly white and male. So we had to take an honest look at our own offers and say, by definition, the way that we've designed them is not equitable. So that's what we're trying to do now, is to go back and look at everything that we have to say, is this designed fair and equitably for other underrepresented audiences? So right now I'm working on a pilot. I'm super excited about it. We've spoken to around about 45 women around the world, of which you were one of them, Emma. And we wanted to speak to current founders and women who have the profile of becoming a founder in the future, to ask them, what is it that you would do differently if you were in the current founder group? And what is it that's holding you back if you're the profile of a future founder? And it was interesting because the two sort of key insights that we got from that conversation from current founders, the overwhelming feedback was, I wish I'd started sooner. And then from the future founder audience, the feedback was, I'm not ready yet. So you've got these two tension points of the same thread. So how do we bring those two ends of the thread closer together? How do we get women who have the skills and the experience and the brilliant ideas to start sooner? And how do we give them the confidence to know that they don't need to have 100% of everything in place to take that leap of faith? So we've built a 12-week online training course with lots and lots of sort of great mentors, curriculum the whole way through. And really the intention of this training course is to get women by the end of the 12 weeks to know that they don't need to be perfect to start, to know that they don't have to have everything in place before they can take that leap of faith. And then, of course, to connect them to other women like yourself who've been around the block a few times and can share some of those skills and experiences, and also the inspiration and motivation to keep going. So I'm really excited about that. It's going to be really interesting to see whether or not that does solve the problem. But that's one of the other things that I've learned in my sort of 10 or so years in startup land. Not every idea is actually going to solve for the problem that you're trying to solve for. And you need to be open to making those mistakes. And a failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it.
You talked about it when you were sharing kind of your career journey. There was the point where you were on the path, the expected path, and then this aha moment that you don't have to be on that path. You can start dictating your own path. How did you find your leadership today to get to those outcomes?
The first thing I would say is I'm a very honest leader. So when I'm walking into an organization, I don't kind of go in with my size 12 boots on and tell everybody what to go do. I don't have all of the answers, and I never have. And I recognize that I do my best work when I collaborate with lots of different parts of an organization to take the best insights and the most useful feedback. And frankly, this is not going to be massively rocket science in terms of a statement, but listen to your customers. And if your customer is an internal customer in the organization, go spend time with them. But what you have to be open-minded to is that the first idea you come up with may not be the one that ends up working. It could be. You could be really lucky in that you've hit on gold dust from day one, and congratulations if you do, because that's never happened for me. So if you include as many people as you can along the way and show that you're listening and show that you're taking in the feedback, you just earn their trust, and you earn the right to keep going. And it's okay to be human and say, I made a mistake, or to ask for help. Those things are completely normal. And then I think the final one really is never throw anyone under the bus. The part that oftentimes happens when we make mistakes is that we try and find a way for the blame to perhaps be put on a different department or on a process or a person. I don't do that. I never do that. And I would never do that in a million years. Part of it is because I know at some point it's going to come back and bite me. So I may as well deal with the situation right now and take the pain up front rather than wait for it to come and get me later on down the line. But also, I just wouldn't be able to sleep at night. I need to be able to put my head down on my pillow in the evening and go, did I do the best I could today? And ultimately, will my parents be proud of me? Did I do things they would be proud of? And if the answer to that question is yes, even if I've made a few mistakes along the way, I can still sleep. If I didn't, and I wasn't honest, and I didn't do the right thing, I wouldn't be able to sleep at all.
I mean, you touched on so many things there, but, values is clearly needs to be aligned to that purpose, to have that harmony, as you say. And I know just working on the basis that everyone's smart, doing the best job they can, if you start there, then you shouldn't be throwing anyone under a bus, right?
Yeah.
Is this different, Annie, because you've had that exposure from startups to, even from a consulting, from the consulting days, but in corporate, does it change where and who you need to focus on to bring about that change?
I do see big differences between startups and corporates. With a startup, it's much easier to move faster and to try new things because there's very few things holding you back here. There's no cultural memory or one of the phrases that I hate the most is we tried that before and it didn't work, because it's super unhelpful. It's almost the metaphorical door slamming in your face of innovation, because it's like, we tried that before, it didn't work. Great. Can you tell me how you tried it before? Can you tell me why it didn't work? There's one of my often used kind of rules is no complaint without recommendation. Don't complain about something and tell me it won't work. Tell me what we could do differently. And if you switch a person's phraseology from that to so from the former to the latter, you can start to open up their mind to possibilities rather than reasons why something won't work. And because of that, sort of lack of cultural memory, because you're a startup, oftentimes it does free people's brain power up to just think about possibility first rather than the reasons why something hasn't worked in the past. So that's the first thing. The second thing is typically when you're a startup, you have recruited people for the very purpose of what you're trying to achieve, i.e. the vision, the crazy dream, not please can you deliver some results this quarter, which typically I often find the targeting and the objectives that you get given in a startup company versus a corporate are really very different kind of kettles of fish as a result. Now, the thing that corporates do much better than startups is, of course, process. The part that startups often fall down on is they're so committed to the long-term vision that they forget that actually managing cash flow in the near future is damn important, because if you haven't got enough cash to keep going, it doesn't matter how big and crazy and awesome your dream is. And it doesn't matter how incredible the technology is if you don't have customers. So some of the things that corporates do really, really well that startups need to learn from are those things of process and accountability, and making sure that you are looking at the next quarter and 6 months to earn you the right to keep going. So I think the two sides of the conversation do need to learn from each other. But when it comes to affecting great cultural change, again, you've got two sides of the same coin. A startup doesn't have the same reach, doesn't have the same potential influence right now, but they have got some really amazing innovative technology that could genuinely shift the world. Whereas the corporate has got the influence, has got the reach, but perhaps doesn't yet have the tech yet, because it hasn't kind of made those crazy innovations. So the interesting part about that is the opportunity for both sides to work together to actually do that and partner, which I know that you do, with Digivisor and a lot of the companies out there that I work with. That's, I think, where this sort of beautiful meshing between the two can happen, where you bring in the earlier stage company that's got a crazy, awesome piece of innovation. You couple that with a larger organization that has the reach, and actually both sides gets to win.
I mean, I'm so glad you touched on that, because one of the themes we explore is that how do you do good and do well? How do you stay in the game, which is often the startup thing, right? How do we stay in the game to achieve our goals? And I think for corporates, having worked there too, it's the challenge of, I have these short-term result pressures, but I need to actually care about what our customers think about. You really have championed diversity and inclusion, and that's part of your personal values, and it's been part of the purpose, including what you're doing today for Microsoft. What do you hope of organisations? How are they going to get this right? What are the changes, or what can we as individual leaders be thinking about to get that outcome?
I want for this to move from a conversation of the tick box exercise through to meaningful programs and outcomes. So an example would be diversity is not complete if you have one person in your team who comes from an underrepresented background. We need diversity of race, color, creed, socioeconomic background, experience in the world, country that you might come from, disability, language, all of the different things, because and this is something that we have kind of drilled into us at Microsoft. You cannot serve the world if you don't represent the world. By the way, there's a reason why my role title is Equity and Inclusion Lead and not Diversity and Inclusion Lead, because I think diversity is a little bit of a cop-out. The way that oftentimes companies talk about it by saying, we have a diverse workforce, when they actually just mean they have some white women on their leadership team. That's not diversity. That's just, like I say, the tick box exercise. But then also it needs to go into how you think about designing your product, how you show up in the world as well. One of the women that works with Microsoft in our developer relations team, she said, I was so surprised when I turned up to Microsoft, not least because on our induction sort of training day, on the first day she was at the company, she goes to that session and there's a web page or a slide up on the screen at the front. And she said, it's the first time I've been at a large corporate where I saw a face that looked like mine on the front page of the introduction deck. And she meant there was a Black woman, not just a woman, a Black woman. And I was like, this is so important. The representation matters. How you show up in the world matters. The words you use matter. The way you design your product matters. And the more that we take that on board to recognize that up front and to not let out a product if it isn't accessible for people with a disability, for example, that shouldn't be allowed. There's billions of people out there who have difficulty reading. If you think about even just the simple thing of like closed captions that we now have on all of the videos on social media, closed captions were obviously built for people with disability, but we use them all the time now for everybody because we recognize that actually it's super helpful for everyone. So, that sort of universal design principle there, if we've solved a problem for a specific niche, but actually it's helpful to everybody. So by being inclusive about how we design our products and services and make sure that they are accessible and equitable, we actually end up serving more audiences anyway. So I firmly believe that if we all took more responsibility for that up front, and particularly in large organizations where we do get to have more of an impact around the world, it's just something that we all need to sort of put up front rather than it's an add-on or a tick box. So I wish more of that happened.
No, I think that was a good challenge to our listeners, Annie, to make it real and to reflect on what we do. So if we look to the future, Annie, what does that look like for you in particular?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea. And I'm okay with that. I've given up trying to plan where will I be in the next 5 or 10 years. I have bought a house in Australia, so I hope I'm still there. The other thing I would probably say is I hope I still get to do work with incredible founders who are changing the world for the better. And I see that as being something that, it's not just I enjoy it, it's part of my purpose, but it is also what I believe is kind of incumbent upon me to do because of my position of privilege. I want us to learn more about diverse groups and organizations. I'm learning every day about Black Lives Matter, about what that translates to for Australia, on how we support Indigenous people across the country, of which we don't do a great job of that right now. A friend of mine, she's called Michaela Jade, who's an incredible Indigenous woman building a great company called Indigital. She talks about how, why would you not want to speak to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders? Because they are the original inventors. They are absolutely the original innovators. So there is 60, 70,000 plus years worth of insight and knowledge there that we haven't yet tapped into. Imagine the possibility of that. Imagine if we were to marry up that insight to technology and to wealth and opportunity. Wouldn't that be an incredible outcome?
Absolutely. And I am a big champion and believe we can all do more there, Annie. I think you've shown a lot of courage in the way that you speak, certainly humility. I want to thank you very, very much for your time today on The Business Of. You've given us leaders plenty of food for thought and certainly inspiration and a real just make it happen, take responsibility. So thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
This podcast is brought to you by the Australian Graduate School of Management at UNSW Business School. I could honestly talk to Annie all day. Her belief that the best leaders listen more than they speak and put the insights and feedback shared by their people into action really resonated with me, and I'm sure it's something we all could do more of. With 1.3 billion people in the world living with a disability, it represents a huge market with unique needs and opportunities. My next guests, Pete Horsley and Alan Jones of Remarkable, share their mission to accelerate technology to build social and economic inclusion of people living with a disability. So Pete and Alan, welcome to The Business Of. I've had the privilege of seeing Remarkable and the work that you've been doing firsthand and up close. So for the listeners' benefit, do you want to perhaps start, Pete? Where did Remarkable come from in terms of the idea, and then tell us what it stands for and where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Like all these things, I guess Remarkable kind of came from a couple of different influences. One of those was we ran a global competition back in 2012 asking people with disability, what's one thing that would change your world? It was kind of like a global challenge type event. And we had someone by the name of Alpa who was living in a small country town in Turkey who said the thing that would change his world would be if someone could create a solar-powered wheelchair. And we put that out to the worldwide maker community, had some expressions of interest from people. And we had a University of Virginia actually put up their hand and said that they'd make a solar-powered wheelchair. It is to this day probably still one of the ugliest prototypes I think I've ever seen. It's kind of a couple of solar panels on the top of a powered wheelchair, but it worked. That was the interesting thing. It worked. And when we finished that, they sent the prototype over to Alpa. And within a few days, he had said that he was able to travel to the temple that he wanted to worship at. And a few weeks later, he said, I've got a part-time job in town now that I can get in there. And these were barriers to inclusion that were being broken down through technology. And probably the second influence was running hackathons. And we could see the role that having user-centered design and having people with disability involved in design was creating some great opportunities, but they weren't kind of going on to commercialization. We weren't getting technology into the hands of people with disability. And so for us, we really wanted to support that development of those products and services. And that was really how Remarkable was born.
So how would you define the purpose of Remarkable, and how has it evolved to the programs that you're running today?
Yeah, so Remarkable is Australia's first disability tech accelerator, and we support early stage startups, breaking down those barriers to inclusion. And we see technology as one means to do that. So our mission really is to make sure that eventually this technology doesn't have to be remarkable, that this kind of technology is actually just the regular way that all technology and all services are created, that they're created considering the needs of all users, not just some that have certain access abilities. So for us, our mission probably has continued to sharpen over time. It's sharpened around that inclusion mindset. It's sharpened around ensuring that we have users at the center of that. And we as a team, I think, are still learning in this process as well. It's an ever-evolving learning process for all of us.
So maybe it'd be good, Alan, to understand your role as entrepreneur in residence for the Remarkable program. What does this startup accelerator look like, and your role in helping Pete and the team bringing this to life?
Sure. So if you can imagine, there must be so many people out there in the Australian community today who are aware of a problem and have an idea about how you might solve that using technology. But that's not yet what they get to do all day, or even very often at all. Maybe they think about it when they're in the shower or out having a walk. But they need a couple of things. So one thing that they need is they need some external validation that perhaps this might be an idea to take seriously, to put some more commitment into it. And so that's one of the values that we provide. So we're good at picking great technologists and great entrepreneurs, and so we can say, yes, you should take this seriously. You should work on it. The second thing that I think that we provide is the reason why accelerator programs are called accelerator programs is that they accelerate you. They accelerate you in your business. So you as a professional, we help you with your productivity, your work-life balance, your goals, your teamwork, your output, your communication style. And we help prepare you if you're going to be a bootstrap company for, how to manage that financial process. And if you're going to be looking to raise investment for your business, we'll help you understand whether or not you have a business that's suitable for that, and then we'll help you raise. And then I think the third most important part of accelerating a startup is by saying you don't have forever. This opportunity, if now is the time, is not going to be the time forever. So how do we make sure that you actually get to market as soon as possible without failing? So how we do that is basically we have an end date. So an accelerator program goes from here to here, and along the way there will be a few challenging exercises and goals that we'll work with you to try and achieve.
And how many businesses have gone through the programs now?
Yeah, we've had 32 startups come through the accelerator so far, over 5 different cohorts.
And I have to ask you, because having watched now most of your cohorts go through and seeing them early, and then when they do their final pitches, you want to help every business because there's such a need there. And what do you look for and which ones have gone through and actually been successful? What are the characteristics when you're looking at this? Because the importance is so great. It'd be hard to almost let anyone be left behind.
So there's many different dimensions to what might make a potentially successful startup and an interesting startup for us to work with. So a lot of startups are taking a traditional business process or a problem and solution set and pretty much just kind of delivering the same sort of solution to the same sort of problem, but maybe just using technology as a way, to market more cost effectively to a bigger potential market of customers. And so that might be, a pretty robust business potentially, and that might be useful. But I guess On the other end of the scale, there might be companies developing, using existing technologies or inventing new technologies that might just very much disrupt, change the economics, change the potential opportunity, change the value of the solution, by a 10x or greater degree. And in a perfect world, those are the kinds of companies that we're very inspired to work with. I guess the other thing is high potential entrepreneurs. I think everybody who sets out on an entrepreneur journey hopes that they will be a high potential entrepreneur. And part of our role is to help them with that, is to help them develop some self-awareness around their strengths and weaknesses. And, because somebody can be successful for a couple of decades and still have some real blind spots, or some weakness that they rely on other team members to fill. So we might be able to work with that person in those areas and make them, much, much more valuable again. In other cases, perhaps somebody set aside a period of time to work on their startup idea. I'll take a couple of years off from my career and work on this startup. And so we might be working with them very intensely for a period of a couple of years, perhaps, and it's succeed or fail. And then if it doesn't work out, you go back to your day job.
And I think, Emma, to your point, it is really hard choosing these because each of them are setting out to achieve something that's aspirational. And it is, as you say, it's the kind of change that we want to see in the world. And so we have to listen to our customers. We have to hear from them and for them to say what's important to them, what's the highest priority. We look for that thing that, what is remarkable about them? Like, has anyone actually tried this before? And if it's not necessarily kind of blazing a new trail, then we might look at kind of something else that pushes the whole sector forward.
How important is that ecosystem that you bring?
I think really the bravest people in the disability tech sector in Australia were the people in that first cohort of the Remarkable program, because they had no role models to follow on from. And so with each additional cohort that we add to our alumni base, there are more and more role models, examples of success for people to look at and think, well, that might be me. I might be able to get to there. So the importance of an alumni network that stays connected with each cohort and tries to help and makes connections and gives coaching and guidance, that's a really significant part of the value of a good accelerator program.
Yeah, I think one of our most valuable assets is obviously our time. If we can use that mentor community to be able to allow them to make best use of their time, then we're aiding them to get to that impact faster. We have a common saying, and the whole thing of it takes a village to raise a child. When we say it takes a village to raise a startup as well, and each of them are kind of propelling them on forward. And some of it is just around kind of being a great cheer squad as well. There's so many doubts that come into the minds of founders, and so to have a group of people say, I believe in what you're doing, I'm behind you, I'm with you, that's an incredibly validating and incredibly powerful thing as well.
So, I mean, it's probably obvious to understand the benefit to the customers of the startups that you're helping and to the businesses themselves. What about those corporates?
Lots of corporates that we talk to who are involved in Remarkable are saying that they want to do something that has purpose. They want to do something that has an impact, that is delivering more than just shareholder value. They learn that some of the models that startups use can be applied to their own business unit or their own work themselves. So they do talk about the two-way benefit of this. The kind of access to the impact and being part of that impact is incredibly important to their values. But then there's some really pragmatic and practical things that they get from it as well.
Every organizational culture is different, but you do see, the larger the organization, the older the organization, the more it drifts away from the desire for opportunity and more towards avoidance of risk. And in startups, it's all about desire for opportunity because there's very little to risk. There's almost nothing to lose. The inspiring thing, I think, for a lot of people in the corporate environment is to be reminded, to be refreshed that risk and opportunity perhaps might not always be entirely connected. Like, if you dial up the opportunity lever, you don't necessarily at the same time dial up the risk opportunity.
Just to add one more thing, if I might, Emma, as well. Lots of corporate organizations have an incredible search for talent. So talent is kind of one of the number one kind of things that they need to keep an eye on. And the area of disability is an area that has been completely overlooked in terms of the amount of talent that's actually in that community. And so I think that there is another benefit that can come as you meet people within our community that do have lived experience of disability, that they're almost kind of discovering a bit of a goldmine of other talent that exists there as well.
Do you think awareness is stronger today in terms of the disability space and what true equality and accessibility means? Do you think there's genuine change happening? How fast is it? Is it better today than it was last year? Is it, where are we in the scale to where you'd love to see it get to?
Yeah, look, I do think that there is change happening. And as a sector, I guess we're standing on the shoulders of the giants that have come before us in areas like racial justice and the rights of women and LGBTQ. So I think that there is a more general push overall towards greater levels of inclusion. I think, particularly in Australia, with things like the area of social policy that we've had around the National Disability Insurance Scheme, that is certainly bringing this more into the public attention and more onto the public agenda than we've probably had it before. And it's allowing people with disability to be a bit more spokespeople about their own rights, because previously they just had to be grateful for the things that they could get. And now they're given the right to have the resources that they need. And that enables them to go, well, hang on, it isn't all the ways that I'd like to see this. There are some things that still need to change. So I do think that technology is just one of the pathways there, but we're starting to see some really exciting changes happening in that.
You touched on earlier the move for corporates and, it's consumer and employee-led, right? The desire to work for organisations that are more purpose-led. What do you think a purpose-led organisation looks like?
It's been a difficult year, I guess, really for the economy as a whole, and for large organisations that we all would have considered too big to fail, have been really threatened by the economic changes in this year. And so on the one hand, it's been a tremendously destructive force. It's created massive unemployment on a remarkable scale, and it's caused a lot of social and business and economic harm to the world. But at the same time, it also kind of resets a lot of assumptions about what might be possible coming back up out of this. So there's an opportunity there in corporate Australia for leaders to set a new set of goals and a new set of purposes for the team. Perhaps, if the purpose of the organization now is to rebuild a new organization almost from the ground up, responding to the new economy that we're moving into, to me, that seems like a much more inspiring goal to get behind. So if we rub the whiteboard, mostly clean of what was there before and what had been up on that whiteboard for so long that it's kind of hard to get the marker out. Once we start again, we can really sit down and have a think. When we sit down and have a think, we have the opportunity to actually really involve the team, no matter how big the team is. There's so many more ideas in there, and there are so many more lived experiences of different aspects of the customer problem in a large enterprise. So I think the challenge for that purpose-led leadership in the next year or two is, how do I make sure that instead of just filling in the same lines of the marker pen on the whiteboard that I had before and trying to make everybody work to those same goals as before, like, how do I make sure that I take into account all of the potential insights that might be out there in the organization, so that when we start modeling again on our whiteboard, we're actually creating something that reflects what's truly going on in the storefront, on the street, in front of the customer tomorrow.
Emma, I think that there's an inherent tension in purpose-led organizations as well. There's a tension because a purpose-led organization actually should have a finite existence. Once you solve the thing that you're trying to solve for, then you are no longer needed. And you've got to then balance that with, and we see this tension in our startups all the time, that you're trying to balance that with being a sustainable organization and having a good culture and all of those sorts of things that are really important to businesses. So one of our startups that came through a couple of cohorts ago is called Exceptional, and it's looking to create smoother pathways for neurodiverse people into employment. And Mike, one of the founders, or the founder of Exceptional, actually has a young son who's on the autism spectrum. And for him, he hopes that by the time his son actually gets into the workplace, that exceptional is no longer needed, that it becomes something that is inherently normal in all organizations, that they don't see disability or neurodiversity as a barrier to entry to employment. And so up until that point, when he solved that problem, he has to create this kind of sustainable business. And so I think corporate Australians are they know that their staff really do want to work for organisations that have this kind of ultimate purpose, and that guiding force needs to be the thing that drives company culture. But they have to realise that they've got to enter into this ultimate tension between those two things.
How can we help corporates understand the value of connecting to Remarkable or to the businesses that you're fostering and helping move forward? Like, what's your advice?
I think helping them to see the opportunity that perhaps they're missing out on. Widening your view of the talent pool, widening your view of who your customer base is. If we're only pitching to the kind of middle 50th percentile, then we're missing out on other target groups. The fact that Microsoft had a Super Bowl ad that they gave prime position to that was about an accessible Xbox controller. Obviously Satya, the CEO, does have a son with a disability, but I think it's more than just goodwill that they're doing that for. They're doing it because they know that there is money to be made there as well. And so organizations can see that if they open up their customer base to suit the needs of a wider population, then potentially you've actually got a greater market share there. You've got greater access to talent as well. So I think it's in kind of helping to reframe some of these conversations. It's not about charity. It's not about kind of doing a nice thing. It's about saying, well, what's right? But then also, what are the benefits of doing what's right?
As the theme of the business of is doing good and doing well, right? I'm loving, the points that you're making there. How do you measure your impact as Remarkable, and what does the future look like for Remarkable?
Yeah, so we're an intermediary. So we work through our startups. Our startups are the ones that are having the impact on the end user. And so we have to measure our own success based on their success. So we have to make sure, as we said before, that impact is embedded into the startup from day one, that it's not just a bolt-on. It's not like we'll make some money and then we'll donate some money to a not-for-profit. We want to see impact baked in from their business model perspective. But we measure our success across a number of different areas of the success of the startups. So we measure it across how many customers are they serving, across the revenue that they're bringing in, also the capital that they might raise. And so across the 32 startups that we've had so far, they've created around about 480 full-time equivalent jobs. For the $4.2 million that we've put in, and that's our operational capital as well as our investment capital, they've gone on to raise about $24 million so far. They've served about 44,000 customers.
44,000 customers, that's powerful, right? That's when it starts to look amazing. Do you have a favourite story, collecting the stories of impact? What's the personal favourites?
Yeah, there's lots I could choose from, but maybe actually one from really one of our first startups actually. They came into the accelerator using 3D manufacturing and 3D printing as part of their business model. And we helped them to kind of consider what the business model was around 3D printing of orthotics. And so they were telling us the story of one of the customers that they were working with who, when they got their orthotic fitted, the pain that they experienced watching their daughter have this orthotic fitted was like nothing else before. They literally physically manipulated the child's foot into the position that they needed it to be. The child was screaming in pain. They then took a plaster cast of that and then took an instrument out to cut it off. The child was extremely scared of all of this. And what Ability Made have been able to do is to take that very physical process and turn it into a digital process. So they use 3D cameras to be able to get an image of the foot, and then they can manipulate that foot digitally rather than physically. And then in the same period of time, they can also cut down the amount of time that an orthotist takes to produce that orthotic then. And the story that we had was that this young girl got her first set of orthotics created. They asked her what colour you'd like it, and she said pink. They asked her, can we put your name on the back of it? She said, yes, absolutely. She went from then associating her orthotics with pain, and she didn't want to wear them, to she did a lap around Narrabeen Lake, which was about 8.3 kilometres.
Fabulous.
So it's incredible seeing
Love
this
it.
change. Yeah.
Love it. And Alan, do you have a favourite?
Yeah, again, like Pete, so many. We have a startup in this year's cohort, and Handy, the two co-founders, Heather and Andrew, and Andrew's a sexuality advocate for people with a disability, based over in Toronto, and his sister Heather is from the advertising industry. But the two of them have set out to solve a huge hidden problem in the world. There are so many people out there living with a disability who are unable to enjoy sexual pleasure because of their disability. Perhaps with the help of a sex worker, they might be able to do that, but obviously that comes with risk and with cost, and most importantly, perhaps lack of privacy. So I think we would all agree that the ability to self-pleasure is a pretty fundamental human right, and it's something that we all take for granted and don't even think about. And yet, there's a significant proportion of the community that never gets to experience that. So the two of them have been working on a line of sex toys, working with an awesome research team down at RMIT, and they have come up with a really innovative first device, which is going into prototyping soon. It's something that someone with a disability can use, irrespective of gender, and it's something that can be controlled with a chin control as well. So if you have limited or no use of your hands or your legs, this is still something that you can use. I fully expect this is going to set the world on fire for that community, and it's just such an enormous problem. If you think about the rest of your life, not having any access to sexual pleasure without a stranger there helping you, how big a difference could this make to the world? So I'm so excited to see that product come to the market.
They're both wonderful stories, and as I said, I found it hard when I've watched these cohorts. So I start off going, that's my favourite. No, that one's my favourite. But that's how you feel when you hear these stories, because it starts with that real, experience of being excluded or not having the same opportunity. And then you see how they've just broken down these amazing barriers to create something that may not have been thought of before or done in such a different and new way that just empowers so many. It's incredible. I commend you, and I definitely want our listeners to see how they can get involved, to get in touch with you, to be part of that mentor or part of the corporate engagement programs, integration programs, funding. There's so many possibilities in that broader ecosystem. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful to hear the story, and actually have the spotlight on you. I don't normally see you guys other than being the workhorses behind the scenes helping those businesses. So thank you.
Thanks for having us, Emma.
I'm really grateful for your support. Thank you.
The Business of is brought to you by the Australian Graduate School of Management at UNSW Business School. The work Pete and Alan are doing is so inspiring. Remarkable is a great example of an organisation that's driving positive change in the world through its clearly defined purpose. And it's worth noting that the entrepreneurs they work with and support create astonishing new opportunities and businesses in the disability sector and across the startup space in general. Leading with purpose in an accelerated world starts with understanding your own sense of purpose, connecting that to your organisation's mission, and then doing everything you can to achieve both. Talk to you next time on The Business of. If you've enjoyed this episode of the podcast and want to hear more, search for The Business of on your favourite podcast app and subscribe.